All right. And we're on. Okay. Thank you for joining us tonight, or today, depending on where you're at, on Fate Points. I'm Jake, and this is the game where we talk everything about Fate. Today with us, we have Paul Mitchener, one of the writers of Age of Arthur, and a recent starter of a Patreon dealing with historical fantasy using Fate. Brief couple of notes of business before we get started. We podfaded for a while. It happens. Basically, both Stacy and I had serious computer problems for a bit back in 2013, and then when we tried to get back to doing it, there was a long series of things. And anyway, at the moment, Stacy is unavailable to help do this, and I've asked him, I said, hey, is it okay if I just kept going on my own? He said, sure. So maybe he'll come back later, maybe he won't. Either way, we're going to keep going with this. All right? So, enough about Fate Points and all that kind of nonsense, and let's get to talking with Paul about all the cool stuff. So, Paul, who are you? Give us a brief rundown of who you are in gaming and what you've done.
Okay, so I'm Paul. I'm a 40-year-old mathematician, but in gaming, what I do is, let's say I started off in terms of professional writing with a source book for wild talents in ancient Greece called Blood of the Gods.
Which I have a copy of right here.
The take is, well, he said it inspired him to do better than me. I think that's fair, isn't it?
Well, it inspired me to do at least as good.
Okay,
I read it because I'm a huge Wild Talents fan. I read it and I saw it and I was like, I think I might be able to do this for money as well. And so it's a safe bet to say that a good chunk of Jade Punk would not have happened if Paul had not written Blood of the Gods. So.
Okay. So I've done some things with D101 Publishing for OpenQuest and Graham Spearing's game Wordplay, and then I got talking to Graham. Graham really wanted to do a Fate game. I wanted to do a Fate game. We both wanted to do something historic fantasy. We started thinking, well, we really like this idea of a more sort of gritty, historically grounded Arthur. So, hey, we should talk. And then Age of Arthur happened, and that was great. More recently than that, I started off Historical Fantasy Patreon, because no one can have too much historical fantasy in their gaming life.
Well, that's just good science.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds. So, yeah, I'd like to talk about some of the things I'm doing with that. But also, we have a scenario book coming out for Age of Arthur that should be there in the next few weeks.
Awesome. So, all right. So you've been doing this for a little while, and let's talk about Age of Arthur. What's the pitch? What's the pitch? You said it's historical fantasy. Kind of go into maybe sell it to me, I guess.
Okay. So the big pitch is, well, both Graham and I read Bernard Cornwell's Warlords trilogy. This type of very dark ages Arthur, rather than the later medieval Mallory type legends. Although there is a big hint of the Welsh magical legends there. So that's the mood of the thing. In terms of the player characters, because Fate certainly works best, I think, when you've got very powerful, well, not very powerful, but powerful, influential, competent characters. So here, of course, at the time we set it, it's not quite, well, it's called Age of Arthur. Arthur is not yet on the scene. The last High King is dead. The country's divided into lots of different kingdoms. The Saxon invaders are gobbling them up. And you're basically the people who are sort of the High Council, as it were, of one of the kingdoms. You're the movers and shakers within one of these kingdoms, and you're trying to, keep your kingdom safe. Beat off the invaders, expand your own influence.
Okay, so you said you moved away from Mallory. I can only agree with that because I find Mallory quite dense. But so you're going with are you going with the Roman hypothesis then of Arthur, where he was some kind of Roman leader, and then when Rome pulled out, or are you going even further back?
No, it's essentially it's very much a post-Roman game.
Okay.
So The last High King was Ambrosius Aurelianus, who was sort of the last of the Romans. Arthur, I mean, of course, we've got him statted up for fate. One of his aspects is thinks like a Roman general.
Okay.
You get the idea of that. But yes, it is a case of, fighting over the ruins of the ancient Roman civilization in Britain.
Okay, and so it's and you're dealing with, and I kind of want to talk about the historical aspect of it as well, the fantasy aspect. So let's break that down into two parts. What kind of research did you do to pull up this historical Dark Ages Arthur, this post-Roman Arthur, and what? Yeah, how deep did you have to get into it? Like, did you spend months and months and months researching this, or was this just something you loved, or kind of walk me through your process, I guess.
Okay, so I say I spent months and months researching it. That's not quite true because it's stuff I'd been reading anyway. But I did look at various Dark Ages history books. I looked at the Mabinogion, the Welsh legends, and in terms of we came to the Gazetteer and things like that, I was doing a lot of research into looking at various local history of Roman towns. So the Gazetteer, what it came from, was looking at an atlas of Roman Britain, seeing what places would have been still extant just post-Roman times, and again, looking into the local history of those places. And of course, some of that was just invention. When there was conflicting stories, I just, made up whatever felt better, really.
Okay, so it was just kind of digging into your own kind of joys anyway, and then building on that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so the fantasy aspect. This is how is this a fantasy? Because right now, I mean, it sounds like a great historical fiction, but where's the fantasy, and how did you add it in, and how did you add that into Fate? I guess is the.
Yeah. Okay, so right away I knew I wanted sort of some form of druidic magic to be real in the setting, and sort of kind of making a bit of a comeback in the post-Roman times. And the mechanics of that, well, they can bless, they can curse. There's nothing particularly overt about it. Then, another one of my obsessions in fantasy, something I've really got to work hard to keep under control, is the Fae. If I don't kick them on the head, they creep into any fantasy thing I write. So they're there in the fringes in the wild woodland, and that led to glamour for the Fae and for people who are Fae-blooded. And then I thought, well, the Saxons need some cool magic too. So we've got Saxon rune magic and shapeshifters. And then part of the fun of playing with some of the legends is, again, you've got these stories, yes, in Britain in the older times there were giants way back. So let's have a couple of giants around. And stories of giants lurking in the Welsh mountains, doing things like robbing travellers and making cloaks out of their beards. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that?
Well, that just makes sense, yeah. So you've got Fae and you've got giants. Now, are you going with for the Fae? Are you going with something like the Tuatha Dé, or are you going with the Sidhe, which came after the Tuatha?
It's more like the Sidhe.
Okay. So they're a little lower powered. They're not gods. They're just.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are people who are still pagan who are worshipping, the old Celtic gods. Okay, more the mainland Britain equivalent of the Tuatha Dé.
Okay. So let's go into the Fate parts then. This is pre-Fate Core, right?
Yes. I mean, the final version came out almost exactly at the same time as Fate Core, which is either great or unfortunate, depending on your viewpoints.
Well, it's the last fragmentary evidence of a pre-Fate Core world, and so archaeologists will find it very useful in the future.
It will be the very last pre-Fate Core Fate game.
So what drew you to Fate, and what separates it from your bog standard Fate?
Okay, so what drew me to Fate is I really like the combination of your character's skills and your character's personality mattering in a game, and Fate seems to me to just get that just right. In terms of even things like, say, I've got some sort of bad temper aspect, the GM offers a compel, I can sort of feel the character's struggle mechanically. And that really works for me. It's also something I like doing to people as a GM. Yeah, that type of play. So the personality mechanics are kind of spot on for that. And okay, in terms of modifications, I made it a bit more deadly, I suppose. So, for example, in a conflict, you can only take one consequence at a time.
Okay.
So, a big, something that does lots of damage means you've taken out. So fights are over quite quickly. The controversial thing I did, or actually it was Graham's idea, I'm going to blame the controversial thing on Graham, and that was to, of course you can pay fate points after a roll for a re-roll, but if you want your +2 bonus from using an aspect, you declare it before a roll.
Okay.
So that turns the fate economy from the standard fate core thing, which is explained as, well, as you know, what will it cost to succeed, to making it, what are you going to gamble to succeed?
Okay. Yeah, that is a major change. And so, was that something you knew you had to do, or is that something that you did during playtesting?
It came out of playtesting. I mean, maybe I'm too kind, but it felt a bit easy in playtesting somehow. And I thought I wanted things to feel very uncertain for the players. I mean, I kind of clocked out and put back the original thing as an optional rule.
Okay.
Like it.
And those are the
Those
okay.
are,
In the magic systems, are they built into the system, or are they uh, how do they work within the system? Because you said you've got shape shifting and druidic magic and glamour and giants, which aren't really magic but magic, So how do you kind of mesh these multiple different kinds of magic with?
okay, so there's several different magical skills in the system. So one of these is, let's pick on shape-shifting, because that's one of the more fun ones to explain. So shape-shifting, at the basic skill level, if you have an animal skin and you pay a fate point, you can change into the form of an animal with that skin. I think you've got a certain number of animal forms equal to your level in the skill. And you pay a fate point again to change back. None of your clothes or possessions or anything like that change with you. And in animal form, you don't have a completely different set of skills. What you do is you have, hey, say you're an angle shape changer who can shift into a wolf. You've got an aspect in play just called, form of the wolf. That costs no fate points to use when you're doing wolfy things. And you don't earn any fate points, the GM compels it to make you do wolfy things. So there's no particular bookkeeping there.
So it's just a kind of a series of aspects or pseudo aspects
Yeah,
that.
the pseudo aspect, I guess. And then when you're coming into other things you can do, I mean, each of the magical skills, there's about 4 or 5 stunts, and that's sort of boosted up. So, for example, there's a stunt with the shape-shifting thing that lets you change without an animal skin, without spending a fate point each time.
Okay, cool. That does sound pretty awesome. And you said there's more than one book out for this?
Well, there's currently just the main book, but like I say, I hope in a couple of weeks that the scenario book will be ready.
Okay, and let's talk about the scenario book. We got a kind of an exclusive here on Fate Points.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So, what's going to be in that? What can you talk about with that?
Oh, I could tell you everything, but then no one will buy the book. But
Well, hold some of it back so that way people have to buy it.
So the scenario book's called Time of the Wolves. It's centred on, well, the Kingdom of Ebrauk, which corresponds to modern-day Yorkshire, which is where Graham and I both live.
Well, that's handy.
Yeah, it's very handy for research. So, and it involves the efforts going on involving building alliances with other kingdoms, retrieving a magical sword from Hadrian's Wall that's in the lair of a giant, but the main focus is actually trying to muster forces to beat off a big invasion of the Angles. So one thing I should have said about Age of Arthur in terms of mechanics when you asked about that, one big deal is the mass combat system.
Okay. Well, let's jump back and talk about the mass combat system. So you've got a well, obviously, if it's going to be about war, you need something like a mass combat system.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
what what was your process for coming up with it, and how does it work?
Okay, so the process for coming up with it was trying to make it somewhat similar to personal combat, in the sense armies have got stress, there's opposed skill checks that whittle down the stress. The stress of an army is proportional to its size. It depends on the skill of your soldiers, your sort of attack and defense skills, and it's boosted by skills in, say, tactics and leadership of your general, which I'm assuming is usually a player character. The fun bit is not that. That's a kind of obvious way of going about it. The fun bit is there's various preambles before the battle. So, it starts off, if there's opposing magic workers on both sides, you'd have a bit of a magical showdown, and that will give an aspect, as if it's a created advantage, to the army that wins. And bear in mind, having these aspects in play is a big deal in the ongoing combat. That really makes a difference. Then there's manoeuvres between the two generals, and again, the winner gets their aspect. And I suppose the big deal of the preambles is there's a battle of champions from the two opposing armies. Each one selects a champion, and they battle fairly, before the battle, showing the will of the gods in the oncoming fight.
That does sound pretty spiffy, actually.
Yeah.
With so it's basically you're building a bunch of aspects first, and then engaging.
Wow. Yeah. And then, of course, as well as the general fighting, player characters can do stuff in the fight, and they get to play at further aspects that the general can use to give them advantages.
Okay, so does the general and the player characters, do they have special move or special maneuvers or moves that they can do with
Yeah.
combat that are separate from what they would normally be able to do?
Well, some of the stunts feed in directly to mass combat. For example, there's there's stunts that let you rally people and pull people back on your side, or give you a bonus to a sort of big initial attack and things of that nature. In terms of the other thing, what the player characters do is name the skill they're using, narrate how they're using it and how it's going to affect the battle, and make a skill check with a difficulty equal to the stress of the other side.
Okay, that sounds. Yeah, that
If
does.
if that fails, they take stress.
Okay, so, yeah, that's definitely something you wanted to bring up. So
Absolutely, yeah.
it sounds very very interesting. I like that. I may borrow that for future things I do. So,
Well, for the SRD, the Skyne SRD, which is just the rules, that's out there for free. So
yeah, I saw that, and that was very spiffy. You have the SRD out. Okay, so let's go back to Time of the Wolves.
okay.
So it's set in Yorkshire, and at some point they've got to do things. So what are the players doing in Time of the Wolves?
Well, first scenario, they're actually trying to build an alliance with Lindum, city to the south, modern-day Lincoln, and unfortunately, Lindum's under attack by a whole load of Angles at that time. On the other hand, if they help them out, and they do have problems with betrayal and slightly incompetent leadership, that will help them put an alliance together. So, good for Lindum and good for them if it works. If not, well, there's no Lindum left for them to build an alliance with. The other thing that's going on is, of the Angles, there's two brothers, two Ethelings, who are vying to be the next heir to the throne. One of them is going for Lindum, and looks to have the other hand. While this is going on, the other one's trying to invade Ebrauch.
So this is kind of like a big campaign kind of setup then for.
Yeah, I mean, it's a series of interlinked scenarios. It's 4 interlinked scenarios that are fairly hefty. Comes in at about 100 pages. There's also a more detailed gazetteer of what's going on around sort of the Yorkshire area and parts of the Saxon lands and so on.
Okay, great. So this is kind of Age of Arthur's version of the Village of Omelette, then,
Yeah, absolutely.
where you've got the nice setup in the center, and then it has all the different things that are happening around it and what you can get involved in.
Yeah, I'll tell you about the big temple. There's got elementary evil in there.
Well, you've already got giants. You could be against the giants. And the Angles. You could claim they're evil, evil-ish, evil-like.
Shades of grey.
Historically, the Angles were pretty interesting folk,
Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
when they started mixing it up with the Saxons and becoming Anglo-Saxons. So,
And then you can repeat the same sort of scenario with Anglo-Saxons against Vikings.
indeed. But, well, technically the Saxons were Germanic, so they were kind of Vikings too. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so you got Vikings fighting Vikings. It's all over the place.
Yeah. And you can make the same argument with the Normans.
Well, Normans, you could actually make a better argument. They
Yeah.
originally came from Norway. They just got lost and lived in France for a very long time. All right. So that's what you've got for Age of Arthur so far. Let's jump forward to your Patreon.
Okay.
Just a little while ago, you introduced a Patreon to do historical fiction for Fate Core. Let's talk about that. Just give us the rundown on your Patreon.
Okay, so, yeah, the Patreon, I guess it's only a few weeks ago I started that off. I had some notes. I thought, yeah, why not? I need to do something to bring these tonight, and I've other ideas too in that type of vein. So I thought, let's do it. I'll have time to play with this. It'll probably be a few months before it gets to the level of funding where I could do anything. And that was a bit quicker than that when it funded. But that's okay. I managed to pull something together. And again, I'd guess probably in later this week that I'll be able to bring out Hunters of Alexandria, which is, I suppose the best way to think of it is urban fantasy in Roman era Alexandria.
Well, I'm interested now. So
And, I mean, other things I did with the Patreon. So this will be about 50 pages. Minimal art, but I have commissioned maps for this.
okay, so what were your let's go into the Patreon experience. So what have you been your experiences with Patreon here, and did it work differently than you expected? Let's talk about that because it's a newish
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. I mean, I think it's really hard for me to tell what makes a successful Patreon and what doesn't. I mean, there's knowledge in play for things like Kickstarter, so people do have some idea what's likely to work and what's less likely to work. But Patreon, I've no idea why what I did worked. I mean, one thing I did do is it wasn't content I was going to be producing anyway, or things I'm making available for free afterwards. It's a subscription model. So essentially, you pay $5 and you'll subscribe into my historical fantasy newsletter, where I'm bringing out something about 50 pages long once per quarter.
Okay, so I think a lesson we could learn then is to have good, solid goals and explain them well.
Yeah, so the goal was so for $100 per, so it was a certain number of dollars per thing I was doing. So for $100, I was going to put something together about 20 pages long, and it was going to be system free. $200, I'd do it with a version of Fate. I think $500, I'm going to be starting producing books. Another thing in terms of Patreon backer levels, there's $1 level where you just want to say hi, and if I see you, I'll buy you a drink. $5, that's the subscriber level. And $25, you can tell me what to do. So essentially, hey, suggest something that's historical or historical fantasy, and I'll write it there.
So you give them a sense of control, and it gives you new ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
In case you run out.
So if there's something you really want to see, you want me to write. Of course, I limited the number of those levels available. There are only 5 of those, and I think there's only 1 left.
Well, then viewers, get on that.
Yeah, so
So okay, so your next one to come out for this is urban fantasy set in Alexandria.
Yeah.
Um, well, let's talk a little bit about that. When in Alexandria is that set? Because Alexandria spans a
Oh, absolutely.
it
Yeah.
contains multitude, as
Yeah.
they say. Uh,
So it's set in 1 AD. So Roman control is solidified. Antony and Cleopatra, that's a generation back, but it's still not completely solid. You know, it's not a solidly Roman city. Well, I guess it was never really a completely Greek city. So you've got different nationalities there. You've got the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Jews. So it's very, very cosmopolitan. There's definitely tensions. And then, of course, you've got monsters there as well. Not openly, but they're there in the background. Obviously, there's fun things I can do with the necropolis outside the walls. Obviously, well, not obviously, I've also done fun things using the Lamia from Roman stories. Yeah, I've also got lycanthropes involved. Nasty
as
priests,
you do.
you know, the sort of thing you'd expect, really.
So that sounds pretty darn fantastic. And after this, because it sounds like you're nearing completion, if not already somewhat complete with it. What's your project for the Patreon after this?
Okay, after this, I'm going back to my roots with the first thing that was suggested by the backer, which is World of Herodotus. So we're going back to ancient Greece. It's not going to be a heavily mythic take on ancient Greece, but let's just assume everything in Herodotus's writings is literally how it happened, literally how it was. So of course, once you're getting outside, you know, the Greece he knew, things are a little bit wacky. Yeah, there are ants and gold and so on in India. You know, babies who never learn a language do start speaking Egyptian, that sort of thing.
That does sound interesting. I had a similar thought a while back about doing something similar with Tacitus, but
Oh, what sort of Germany and Britain and
yeah,
stuff.
a sort of fantasy Germany where the goddess of the lake comes roaming through once a year and murders everybody who's outside. That sort of thing. But then my focus has been a lot on the Germanic lore throughout history, and well, post or pre-Christianized Germanic lore is pretty much Tacitus.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's all. It's all that was written down. Or I mean, you extend things from.
It's because the Germans didn't believe in writing histories. They believed that writing was magic, and so you shouldn't do it a lot. It's not something you should dig into.
Bit dangerous just to write your name down.
Which is also why we can't really figure out those big pictures they put up on rocks, because
Yeah.
all the words around them are just the names of people,
Yes.
and not the people in the story that the pictures are depicting. Just the people who happen to be there, or or whatever. I'm a personal fan of Sigurd Saga, where you have the big picture and nobody could figure out what it was until we went to Iceland and found a picture or found the depiction of Sigurd Saga, and they're like, oh wait, no, these words have nothing to do with this picture. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's the fun thing, isn't it? You can extrapolate from the Scandinavian stories, which are at least written down, because paganism lasted later.
Yeah, except then when you get into Tacitus, where he mentions these things, like he'll mention in a sentence about a god, and he'll call it Mercury, and you're like, well, it's definitely not Mercury.
Yes.
So, what was it, and why was it important enough for him to write down, and why didn't he write any more?
Yeah, the Romans were so and so's for that, just saying, oh yeah, they worship Mercury in this city.
Well, yeah, they just kind of conglomerated everything into one place and said, well, yeah, I'll kind of worship our gods, really. So you just have different names, and that's fine.
And then you've got to work out, what's that mean? Were they a psychopomp? Were they a messenger god? Were they a trade god? Is that what meant?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the joy of trying to figure out. Well, I'm sure you have the similar joy with the Saxons, who
Oh yeah,
also Germanic, also didn't write things down.
yeah. Yes, exactly the same situation. And of course, you can start making analogies from the Vikings and so on, but then again, what's written down from there is still hundreds of years later. Things change in that time.
Although, again, the Saxons did marry into the Angles, and
Yeah,
the British tradition of writing things down is very, very old. So that's
true. You do have sort of, Saxon texts in the Latin alphabet from fairly early on.
yeah.
Well, I guess by then they're already Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's you're not getting the original view, but you're getting something at least that follows up, and that's.
You get ideas. You've got writers like Bede. You've got the fact that Alfred the Great was a big fan of literacy.
Yeah.
That helped.
Well, and there was a whole period of kind of a renaissance in writing in England that was way earlier than everywhere else, where literacy was suddenly really high for some reason, and then kind of died off again in England. So you've got a lot of really early texts. Well, early, I mean, they're still kind of post-Roman, post-Christian, but, and I'm sure all our viewers are really into the discussion of literacy in Middle England.
Well, I'd be thrilled if I was watching this.
So, well, I find again I follow the Germanic peoples around. I find their stories interesting, and so with the Saxons and the Anglo-Saxons and even the Norman invasion later, you find a lot of really interesting things that happen, kind of in England, because England is separate.
Yeah, it's separate from continental Europe. It's different.
Yeah, it's a bit like when scholars found Iceland and they realized, wait, this is a whole separate group of people who don't know anything about what's happened on the mainland and have written down texts. Nice. So,
and then, of course, you have some with Ireland, which is different again.
Yeah. And that is the beautiful part of the islands, the Northern Islands. Now there's something you should do. You should do a whole thing on the Northern Islands and how language spread.
Jake, for $25, you could make me.
If I had it, man, if I had it. We'll see next month. If it's still available next month, I will go for it. But currently, I don't have the money to put that down. All right. So talked about Age of Arthur. We talked about your Patreon. Well, what else? What other plans do you have for the future? I think we're coming up on the end of the interview here. So what are your plans for beyond Patreon or beyond Age of Arthur? Talk about, this is your chance to talk about whatever you want to talk about with gaming.
Okay, so I mean, things I'm working on now. I mean, I'm doing other things for Arc Dream. So it's not Fate, but playtesting for Ninth Legion is started. That's kind of exciting. I've got a 1950s hard science fiction setting that should be coming out soon. That's just in editing. And yeah, I'm playing around doing things involving the Saxons, funnily enough.
All right then.
But there'll be a whole bunch of stuff coming out soon. You'll see. Just watch this space.
Very exciting. All right. Well, thank you again, Paul, for being on the show, helping us do our big comeback show.
Thanks, Jake. Hope it lived up to the title, knocking it out the park. What to live up to.
All right. Well, I wish you the best in the future, and thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed us, please like us on YouTube and iTunes. Leave a comment. Let people know that we're not boring or what have you. I'm Jake, and this has been Fate Points.